Hello and welcome to our Energy Connect studio, COP28. I'm delighted to have sitting next to me Gary Rose, EVP Canada Nuclear with AtkinsRéalis. Thank you so much for joining me, Gary.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
Now, how can nuclear power become a key player in the clean energy transition?
I think to me, this is quite simple. I come from Canada, Ontario, where nuclear has been a large part of our baseload energy for decades now. We are over 60% of our energy in Ontario is from nuclear. Between 2005 and 2014, we closed 8 gigawatts of coal in Ontario on the backs of nuclear. Some renewables, but largely on the backs of nuclear. And in Ontario, we have about 35% is hydro and about over 60% is nuclear, with a little bit of gas and a little bit of renewables. And we don't have a climate that allows us to rely upon renewables. So you need baseload alternatives. So once you've maxed out your hydro, the next best thing for baseload energy is nuclear.
That's true. And what are you, in your view, some of the benefits, but also maybe some of the drawbacks of nuclear energy?
Sure. Well, the benefits are clean energy, 24/7, 365 days a year. You don't have to worry about it. It's very reliable. From a landmass perspective, you get large amount of energy on small land masses. So in places like Ontario, you had a dense population in the southern parts of Ontario, you can put 1 to 4 nuclear units that we've got at our Pickering station. We've got 8 units, 6 are currently operating. At Darlington, 4 units. At Bruce Power, 8 units. So you can put large amounts of energy in a small landmass. The amount of fuel that it uses is extremely low. And I know we'll shift in kind of this hybrid of what's the not so news. I mean, we always talk about waste. And waste is a byproduct of all energy. The one thing I would say about nuclear is we know where all our waste is. Coal, it's in the air. It's making it difficult for people to breathe and, quite frankly, killing people. When we closed our 8 gigawatts of coal in Ontario, we went from 53 smog days in Toronto in 2005 to 0 since 2015 after closing our last coal plant. So it's really helping people with their health. The waste is consequential, like airplane flights are consequential. That's why we manage them very well. So we know where all our waste is. It's recorded right from the fuel bundles going in, and it's recorded and tracked by independent associations. And because of the high energy density of nuclear, the amount of waste storage that it takes up is very small. So Darlington plant, which provides 20% of Ontario's population, is 14 plus million people, so quite the largest province in Canada. 20% of the province's energy comes from Darlington. In over 20 years, and you're going to tell I'm Canadian when I say this, all of that waste fits in a single hockey rink size. So it's very small quantities of waste. That is a downside, but I think it's very well managed, and I think it's a misunderstood component of nuclear. And I guess the other thing we'll say that's a challenge is these are large capital intensive projects. You require large amounts of funding to set these projects up. But once they're set up, they run for 70 years, 60, 70 plus years. Again, 24/7, 365, very high capacity factor, not like other technologies. And with countries like France, and now recently Canada, 2 weeks ago, announcing that nuclear is considered green and a part of the green bond. A lot of investments coming from Canada, investment tax credits, etc., which is invigorating investments into clean energy products like nuclear. I think that's helping to solve some of this financial crisis. And quite frankly, it gets back to your first question, if you do not invest in nuclear, in my opinion, we don't have hydro. Many countries don't have hydro. The only other alternative for baseload is nuclear. If we don't figure out how to make these investments in nuclear and shorten the licensing process, we will not achieve net zero. There's no way. And that's why we heard, this week, WNA in 24 countries, I believe, now have signed up to a commitment to triple the amount of nuclear energy in order to support net zero. I was stood up in front of with 120 plus other industries yesterday from an industrial standpoint, standing up and supporting. We need to work together as an industry to support that commitment of tripling the energy in order to achieve net zero, solve climate change, be a big part of it.
Yeah, and I mean, you comment on what I wanted to focus on, which was, finance and policy,
Right.
how that's really going to be able to push nuclear projects. And you've highlighted that a bit, but yeah, what else do you think needs to be done, or is enough being done then on the policy side? Or
Yeah, I would say, I mean, my reference point is Canada. I mean, AtkinsRéalis has nuclear all over the world. We have projects all over the world, including right here in the UAE. But in Canada, we have what we call an impact assessment process. It's a 6 to 7 year environmental process, safety licensing process, community stakeholdering, Indigenous stakeholdering, which is extremely critical and important in Canada. That's a long process. We need to find ways to not cut corners, but shorten the process, be a lot more efficient, leverage the licensing from one site to another site, not repeat things. Bottom line is we've got to learn how to get faster at this. And quite frankly, when you talk about tripling the amount of energy, in Ontario we have 13 gigawatts of nuclear power right now. The Independent Electricity System Operator, which is a planner for Ontario, issued a report calling for 18 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2050. So that's more than double in Ontario alone of nuclear power. That is a big task. That is a task that requires huge amounts of people. So we are looking, like every energy in this energy transition, every company in this energy transition, looking for the best people to come and help make this, to do the planning, the engineering, to make these projects successful. And when you look elsewhere in Canada that don't have the luxury of us, which are 93% clean, many of the other provinces still have coal and gas plants. So not only do they need to close those plants in, they need to find new base loads. So their task is 3-4 times more. So you look at Canada as a whole, getting sufficient number of people in the timeline, manufacturing capacity in the timeline that we need is going to be critically important. We need to start talking about not one nuclear plant, a fleet of nuclear plants. Canada, we believe we need about 50 gigawatts of nuclear by 2050. So how do we deploy SMRs, large nuclear, in mass to make that happen? And by doing it in mass, you repeat it over and over and you drive the price down. So there's a kind of multitude of different benefits by taking that type of an approach.
yes, and so then what's your outlook then for the future of nuclear energy? And it sounds a bit more optimistic.
I'm very optimistic about it. Of course, at AtkinsRéalis, I am the president and CEO of Candu Energy, which is an AtkinsRéalis company. And Candu is a Canadian-owned technology, owned by the government of Canada. AtkinsRéalis is the licensee. We're privileged to be the licensee, the OEM of the Candu technology. We have 19 operating Candu plants in units in Ontario, and we have plants in South Korea, Romania, China, and Argentina. So 33 Candu plants have been deployed around the world, 29 of which are still operating. So we are currently doing what we call a midlife refurbishment of many of those plants. And because of our design, we don't have a large pressure vessel. We actually have what we call fuel channels. So to extend the life of those assets, we're able to remove those, put new ones in. So we're helping that way by extending the value that these countries already have in the 33 units. But last week at World Nuclear Exhibition in Paris, we announced our next generation of Candu reactor, which is a 1,000 megawatt Candu reactor. And so it's a larger size we ever had. It'll be the most modern nuclear plant, in my opinion. It'll be the best nuclear plant on planet Earth because of the fact that it uses natural uranium. So for countries that don't have enrichment capacity, they can use Candu. Does not require enrichment, which is from a weapons proliferation has a number of benefits to certain countries that have uranium but don't have that enrichment capability. It's a heavy water reactor, which makes medical isotopes for operations for cleaning of medical tools for cancer diagnosis, etc. Right now, the Candu reactors in Canada are supplying 60% of the world's medical isotopes for cancer research and certain cancer diagnosis. So this is an incredible feature that only the Candu reactor has. Because we have online fueling, we have one of the highest capacity factors. In fact, Chernobyl 2, which is a Candu reactor, it's got the highest capacity factor, uptime, of any nuclear reactor in the world for a 10-year period. So we believe that nuclear is needed, of course. we are investing in this next generation, which, like I said, I think will be the most modern reactor that we have, and with the features will really differentiate itself from many of the other traditional reactors that we have. And we're all in Canada to deploy a fleet. I'm not talking one, again, getting back to my earlier comment. I want 24 or 30 of these reactors deployed in Canada and do the same around the world. And it's not about us versus others. We need it all. Like, this pie is big. This pie just tripled its size. So we believe that we can provide a slice of the pie. We can work collaboratively with. Micro modular reactors are needed, small modular reactors are needed, and large reactors of all kinds are all needed. We need renewables, we need wind, we need solar, we need hydrogen generation. We need it all to be successful.
That's really interesting, Gary. And just before we go, we're here, as we said, at COP28. Right. What's the importance of COP, and how is nuclear part of the conversation?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I was at last year's COP, and I scratched my head. I went around to countries that, France has 70% power nuclear, and there wasn't much conversation about nuclear, and that was the case for even the Canadian booths. So this year it's quite nice to see nuclear playing such a large role, with the World Nuclear Association leading the commitments of the tripling. Even in the expo here, the nuclear net zero for nuclear exhibits, and many companies. So it's really elevated itself. I think we were kind of left on the outside in past COPs. I think there's a realization now coming that we need to be in the inner circle, a part of the conversation, and we can go a long roll. And quite frankly, as I said, we need it all of the above. By having more base load, you enable more intermittence, right? Solar, wind, and that. So I think that really helps to balance the entire grid, we call it.
Great, Gary. Well, that's really good to hear. And I just want to thank you for coming down to the Energy Connect studio.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
Thanks everyone for watching, and I look forward to bringing you more studio interviews from COP28 soon.